Hello and welcome back, everybody. So, as a follow-up to yesterday's video, or last night, or this morning's video, depending on when you viewed it, I've had a chance to not only look over these again, the updated scrolls, the new Warscrolls, some of the new variants on the existing kits in the Death line, the Flesh Eater Court, and get some feedback also from and some comments that other people have been putting out regarding this. Now, mostly it's been positive, but there have been some things, some revelations, and that might have some impact in terms of how you feel about this. It also could be important for what we might be seeing coming in the future. Maybe some additional changes that might have major impacts on how the game works. So let's go and just take a look. First of all, as we know, we've seen that there is now a ghoul riding a zombie dragon. We have some mechanics that we see both on the Ghoul King, which is they can summon with their command ability, which is not something that you can counter. It's not something you can stop, at least not by any of the existing current powers or abilities. There's no unbinding going on. And then we see that also, I'm going to go pop around here, so forgive me. We're going to see some major changes here. Again, I think that the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon in this list here is merely just because it's the same kit. But then we have the Ghoul King on the Terrorgeist, and the War Scroll, it has a Summon Royal Guard. So if this guy is the general, then you could set up a new unit of Crypt Horrors or Crypt Flayers within 3 inches of any table edge. So we've gone over that. But there's some major changes that I think a lot of people are just starting to discover, and that is some of the summoning abilities that were on these War Scrolls are gone. Now, as far as we can tell, currently you can still summon in... Well, no, you can't. You can no longer summon Crypt Horrors. They are now a mechanic, not a spell, that brings Crypt Horrors in. And you're going to see that that's the same thing for the ghouls. And you'll probably find that that's going to be the same thing. Now, we saw that previously with Vargheists, okay? So if you noticed when the Death book came out, Vargheist suddenly, so there was some subtle changes. Vargheist you couldn't summon, but the Terrorgeist you could, the Zombie Dragon you could, all the skeletons and ghouls also. But ghouls now no longer have that on their War Scroll. So, and let's also realize that there is the ability to use older versions of War Scrolls, which kind of makes a lot of this moot. Some of the older War Scrolls are not going to work synergistically with the new War Scroll versions of the same units, but then that's just if you go to an event, it's probably going to comp to be using the more current one, but it's also going to be, how are you going to keep track of these things? They look the same exact, the models are the same exact ones, so which ones, if you summon one in and then you have another one on the table that you started with, then it becomes complicated. I just don't appreciate that GW kind of like, look, they're trying to make everybody happy, and they're trying to bend over backwards so everybody can play the way they want, but it does create some real conflicts. And one of them is, if they've updated the War Scrolls, I think that we should just accept that the updated War Scrolls are the ones we need, with the exception of perhaps some situations with the retired model line armies like the Bretonnians and the Tomb Kings. There's some exceptions there, certainly. I think those can still be used, but I think if a current unit that's still allowed, well, they're all going to be allowed, but still exists and has been updated, replaced with a new version, I think you got to really default to the new version. But because GW has kind of left that open, it's a minefield. People can do what they want, play which version they want. And that just opens all kinds of nonsense. But if you do summon in a ghoul unit, say, so they no longer have the spell ability that now is open to all wizards. It's now on the character-oriented models, which is an innate ability, or it's a command ability. So we'll go and look at that. But here, they have these abilities now that just gives them something if they're within range of the Ghoul King, which, by the way, they're called the Abhorrent Ghoul King, no longer the Strigoi, which means that the charnel pit, the battalion, the old one that they've now re-added to the app, which strangely enough, when this all happened, now no longer technically functions, although I would allow it. I mean, it seems to make sense that battalion would be usable. It's not even one of the better battalions. But anyway, let's go and take a look again. Obviously, we're looking at things like Crypt Flayers. They never did. I mean, they just got added. They don't have that ability. So it's really, when you take a look at the hero versions of these guys, like this Crypt Haunter Courtier, and you can take a look here. You can see that in each of your hero phase, you roll 6 dice. For every 5 or 6, you add 1 model to a unit of crypt horrors. So that's how you gain more of them. Again, you can take a look. This is not a spell. This guy is not a wizard, okay? He's a hero now. He's a single model. He's just a heroic version of a crypt horror. And in your hero phase, if you roll 6 dice, and if you get a couple 5s and 6s, you add additional guys to an existing unit. It has to be within 10 inches, but that's not a problem. I mean, that's pretty far. You can distribute it if you get a couple. If you have, say, for instance, a unit of crypt horrors flanking this guy, you can now swell this by 1 or 2 guys on each one, depending on how well you roll. Just better have those models. But there's no unbinding. And certainly, as you're going to see, this is a great way to replace destroyed models, but it's also going to be the way to pad units and increasingly make them more powerful. So, for instance, here, let's take a look at the Vargulf, which previously was reduced from being a unit, now has this nice ability where it can be brought in. Let's see. See, a lot of these now can also heal, especially this other mechanics where if they're within proximity. Okay, this guy is a courtier, and there's a bunch of courtiers, and there's a mechanic on one of the mounted. I think it's the mounted zombie dragon. It might be. Let's take a look at that. Where you can just bring one in. I forget if it's a command ability or a basic ability. So let's take a look. This is the Ghoul King, the abhorrent Ghoul King on a zombie dragon. And its special ability is a summon courtier right there. So the zombie dragon one can bring in the Vargulf courtier or any of the other sub courtiers, the hero version courtiers. And so each time you get to a command phase, boom, you're bringing in another guy. Now this is within 3 inches of any table edge. It has to be more than 9 inches away from an enemy model. But you don't think that's powerful that he can now pop in potentially on your enemies behind your enemy's lines? Yeah, that's his movement phase for the turn, and you have to make sure that there's a lot of his troops within his deployment zone that has to be further away. But it's a challenge, and I think it's great. By the way, I really think it's great. I'm already hearing some people whining about this. Some people responding to my videos. I got one guy who he says it's unfun, but if you take it's like, oh well, what's fun about summoning? Thomas, I'll direct it to you because I respect your opinions and your points, but you could say that about any ability. There's so many abilities that are default abilities or command abilities that you cannot stop. There's things like in the Chaos book or in the Seraphon, the Engine of the Gods, for example, where you could just bring in stuff and there's not even any dictation on how big that unit is. You have to comp that. Otherwise, if somebody has 50 models, they're going to plop 50. If they got 100, they're going to plop 100 in that unit. There's no issues. Same thing with things like the Greyherd Shaman, I think it is, from the Beastmen. People are starting to argue that he can summon in the Gash. And I think it's any non-hero monster. It's just a default monster. But hey, he can summon in 90% of the monstrous arcanum, which is awesome. But it is one of those things that's it's got an open-ended interpretation. It's certainly legal if you go by the rules as written. It seems like it's how it's intended, but that's pretty powerful. Yeah, you can unbind that stuff, but can you do that with the Engine of the Gods? That's just a roll. There's some certain abilities on Chaos. They're just rolls. They are just rolls, or I am doing this. This is the ability of that unit. And to say that it's not fun, I think is a real stretch because you can pull that from just about any army list, and we're probably going to see more of it. So I'm wondering now, just to pull this back. And hey, look, that's Thomas's opinion. So if he doesn't think it's fun, then he can either change it or not play it. But I have a feeling with that kind of an attitude, you're going to be bumping into a lot of abilities in Age of Sigmar that you're going to be complaining about. So, but we could be seeing a different paradigm here, guys. Let's take a look at the zombie dragon on a Terrorgeist. Once again, we did this yesterday, but let's take a look at it with another lens. He now has a command ability where he can summon in a entire unit of Crypt Horrors or Crypt Flayers, 3 of them. And these are command abilities. So you're only going to have 1 of these. That's pretty powerful. But let's also realize that some of the other abilities are not command abilities. They're just default powers on the Warscroll. So let's take a closer look. First of all, one of the big limitations that have been applied is your Terrorgeist and your Zombie Dragon no longer have summoning. I am not happy about this. I just do not like this. I'm pretty upset about it because I have specific models that I purchased thinking I could potentially summon them in. Not that I do it a lot, but it's possible. Now I can't. Now that's not happening. So if you take a look, for instance, at a zombie dragon, I think they replaced his ability with something else. And I think they just took it away. Yeah, they just took it away. No longer can you summon an individual zombie dragon, which I thought was a very cool thing. You can deploy him by himself, but you can't do that with a summoning spell. Can't bring him in. You have to deploy him now, unless a new mechanic is coming up somewhere else. Okay, so now we have a Terrorgeist by itself. And here, he gets to heal if he's really close to one of the Ghoul Kings, which is fine. I'm cool with that. It could be next to a Ghoul King on foot or one that's riding something. I'm fine with that. Otherwise, everything's pretty the same, but you're not summoning this guy anymore unless you're using the old version of the Warscrolls. And I had a discussion with Nicholas Bullard, and he's right. The old, you could summon in the old version of the scrolls because, again, GW said, hey, yeah, you can use either version you want, but then that opens up a whole can of worms. Why would anybody use this one just to get a little bit of healing? I'd totally use the other one and have the ability, if I can use the previous version of this scroll, and have the ability to go and summon one of these guys in if I am so inclined. So it just seems to be counterintuitive that they would do that. But some of these other abilities, like if we look at the Infernal Courtier, all right, let's take a look at his. He's got a Muster Royal Guard. In each of your hero phases, you roll 6 dice once again. Then you can bring in a unit. You're going to add 1 model to a unit of existing Crypt Flayers. Still, this is just a default ability. It's a basic ability. So yes, it does have some impact. There is definitely some implications when you consider that you're not rolling for spells. Nobody can unbind it. Nobody can stop it. And let's take a look at the next one. So no, we've already gone and talked about the Nope, I want to go back. We already talked about, for example, I lost my way here. Okay. So there we go. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So we know about like Crypt Horrors. Let's take a look at these Crypt Flayers. Let's see what they've got on their list. Do they have anything that adds on? Nope, they got the Fearsome Battle Cry. There you go. I'm not sure, but I think it's the solo hero. Let's see if we can get the solo hero that's part of the, nope, it doesn't have it listed here. Just the Ghoul King, the Aberrant Ghoul King on foot. I think he has an ability that's been updated. Let's see if we can take, nope, not order. We want to take a look at all the Armies of Death. So let's see if I can go find that while I'm bouncing around here. It may not show up here. It's in the app. No, I can't find it. Here's one nice and interesting bonus here. You have the Necromancer. Now, he has an ability that's still going to affect all of these new ones. They all have the Mordant keyword. All right? And he has this Van Hels's Dance Macabre, which does include the Mordant keyword. So you can still use this Van Hels's Dance on all of these new Warscrolls. So there's plenty of synergy within the entire Death line. And unless they make changes to summoning skeletons and summoning direwolves and zombies, which all still have that ability, what we're seeing here is a particular subfaction that no longer utilizes the same mechanic, the same summoning mechanic, in order to generate, how you bring additional models onto the table. Again, I don't look at this as a bad thing in any way. I think this is just a different way of playing the same mechanic. It looks like the summoning is going to be still relegated as we've known it to the death rattle units, and this also still exists for things like Cairn Wraiths and Banshees and Spirit Hosts. But what this tells us, and this is something I mentioned in a previous video about FAQs, is more than just FAQs that apparently are periodically being updated by GW and put out on, for instance, the Facebook page, which is nice. They're just going to update the app. They're going to put out updated versions of these Warscrolls on the app. You'll find it when they release, say, for instance, a new Battletome or something like that. And what'll happen is you'll you'll delete the previous one and re-download a new one, and you'll see what the new synergies are and what the new limitations and new adjusted abilities are. And that's what happened yesterday when they made all these updates. And what does that mean? That means that we're not on stable ground anymore. We don't know ever if the Warscroll versions that we have used are ever going to be the ones that are consistently, going to be the case ongoing. Now, this is a double-edged sword. I think there's a positive to this. What it means is that they have the opportunity to make changes if things kind of get out of hand. If there's mechanics and abilities that are just too out of control and they can really make you detract from the game. The other thing is that you don't know if the collection that you've built is going to work the same way from month to month, quarter to quarter, and it's like at any point in time a whole new book could be thrown down in your lap that changes how you use your army. And if you're kind of going lean and mean and just buying X amount of models just to play in a certain way, well, hold on to your seats, people, because that's no longer going to be the case. You better have excess models and prepare with these different versions of kits to be able to have mixing and matching that you didn't think you had before. And then you might want to actually buy more stuff to try and accommodate some of these new releases. So just be ready for that. I think that as long as you have the open mindset that this is the kind of thing that's going to be happening, and have the open mind also that it might be a good thing with these new synergies and updated Warscrolls, that you'll be fine. But if you're the kind of person that just whines and complains and cries and gets upset about every little thing every time something happens just because a little curve was thrown your way, well, you're not going to like this. This is going to be more the kind of thing you're going to complain about. You're going to be crying about whether it's fun. You're going to be crying that it's a mechanic that's broken. Oh, now I can't unbind it. Now I can't stop it. Well, this is certainly a lot. I don't think that this is as powerful and as abusive as the summoning. But I will say this. If you have an army that mixes and matches with this and with summoning, guess what? It's a killer to have the mechanic to bring in additional units, to grow units, to remove models, as well as the ability to, as the death faction still has, the ability to now summon units with necromancers and other characters, and even things like Coven Thrones, which are wizards, to be able to put stuff on the table with a summoning mechanic. So what we might be seeing, guys, is a change, not just to the death faction with this, but we might see more of this with other summoning type factions. Maybe we're going to be seeing a little bit more of this kind of mechanic, maybe with new factions that come onto the table. But we probably are going to be seeing some of this stuff probably with Lizardmen. It's very possible. I could be wrong, but I'm going to guess that if we see it here, we're going to see it in other places, maybe a mixing and matching, not a complete turnover to this kind of mechanic, but in addition, that might give some additional flexibility and more options on the battlefield, more ways to do this. Same thing with chaos. Chaos is huge for magic summoning. And so now we have mechanic summoning, ability summoning basically, and spell summoning. And so get ready for a whole different way of crazy, because if you thought summoning was a problem before, you're going to be upset now. If you didn't care, like I don't, and you know that there's ways to kind of limit it or mitigate it, this is a way to get around that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll explain. I see comps all the time, and every time I see somebody whine and complain about summoning being overpowered, broken, and unfair, I look at somebody who clearly doesn't look at the profiles and the abilities for summoning armies that don't have any summoning mechanic. And of course, nothing says that they can't bring other elements of their factions into the game in order to be able to summon as well, which all factions have an option for that right now. And maybe Destruction doesn't. Destruction I don't think does. But they don't really need it because they're brutal. They are absolutely brutal. And if you don't think that's the case, go play against the Beast Claw Avalanche or some of the new stuff that's come out for the Orcs, for example. But the people that complain about that stuff, they're not looking at things like area denial. I mean, you have cluster units, large volume units, quantity numbers of units, where this is one of those advantages that people just never understand, and just maybe they don't have enough games under their belt where they don't see that those single wound model units, like clan rats and zombies and various other types of units, where they say, oh, they're not, all wounds are not equal, so this guy would rather take these elite forces. There's benefits to having these cluster units, especially for larger games. But yeah, you could do that certainly with single models with the elite units too, but they don't have the overrides that tend to make these big, the certain other units that are not elite more attractive when there's large numbers of them. But let's take a look and see if you have large numbers, 30, 40, they take up a whole area of the battlefield. And when you do that, you're preventing your opponent from summoning anywhere near that area because you can't summon within a 9-inch area. Now, if you start summoning stuff, try to summon stuff when you're in the midst of a battle, when there's a whole collage of units connected to each other, suddenly you can't summon when you think you want to. You have to summon behind you or off to the side. Sometimes it puts it way out of where it even matters. Well, guess what? These mechanic summoning, not the spell summoning, or they're not able to be unbound, but they don't have the same limitations. It's going to be either one of two things. Either you add to existing units with no limitations on proximity to your enemies, meaning if you have a Crypt Horror unit, you're just adding another Crypt Horror there. And you just, as long as you got room to put them in there, you put them in there. And I'm sure you'll find the room, unless the guy is completely surrounded. But even so, you're just adding another guy. So maybe you lost a Crypt Horror, but boom, all of a sudden you can gain one, maybe more. Or you're bringing in an entire unit of them. Now, it's not right in the middle of the table or within range of the guy who has the mechanic or the casting ability or the command ability, but it's going to be on the table edge. All right. And that table edge thing could mean that you could bring on a unit right onto the board and go after an objective. And this is an objective-heavy game. If you're just playing, let's line up and fight, you're not playing Age of Sigmar the way it's meant to be played, really. Yeah, you can do it. It's just not going to be as much fun. And anybody who complains about whether this game is fun, it typically just throws models on the table and starts complaining that, hey, there's no point to this. It's not fun. I can agree upon that. I demo it usually with scenarios, and that usually makes it fun. But I got to say, if it's a scenario-based game, more often than not, people enjoy it. If it's not a scenario game, they're just looking at the mechanics of the game. And if it's not to their liking, they're definitely going to not enjoy Age of Sigmar. So let's assume that we're playing with an objective, scenarios where you have to maybe take and hold or get to a certain board area or get off the table on your opponent's side or whatever it is. And now you have a mechanic where you just got a guy appear at any table edge as long as they're not near an enemy force. And it's a big table, 6x4 table. You're going to be able to get those guys onto that table edge with a lot more flexibility. The non-spell summoning mechanic is huge. Is it broken? No. Is it unplayable? No. Is it unfun to play against? Well, that's up to you to decide. And if you have that kind of an attitude, well, I don't really need to have a conversation about it, honestly, because I can point to a million different, well, maybe million's a little bit exaggerating, but a ton of other powers in this game that are unblockable, unstoppable, automatic, and they're not spells. You can't unbind them, and they're crazy powerful. Things that cause mortal wounds, or like the Star Dragon's breath that just you can bombard the damn table. Things that you just roll and it happens. It's not even rolled to make it happen. And there's a lot of them. Things like the Beast Claw Avalanche, where if as long as these units are within range of each other and they charge, units nearby just suddenly start racking up all kinds of mortal wounds, tons of mortal wounds. In some cases, it could be 2d6 mortal wounds, and then for the Mournfang, each one that's near was a 4+ causes another mortal wound. I caused, I think, 15 mortal wounds in one turn with a huge Beast Claw Avalanche charge. I am not kidding. Well, I had a lot of Mournfang, but still, that was a big thunderous charge. Was there a save against that? Only if you had a save versus mortal wounds. And there's plenty of other abilities that are not specifically mortal wound type things that you just can't stop. So let's kind of put that idea and that argument aside that you can't stop it now and it's summoning. There are some limitations to this. It is something that's unstoppable. And of course, what can you do? You can kill that creature or that monster, and no longer is that power on the table. So guess what? Focus fire, focus shooting, focus spell attacks, focus your charges, get into hand-to-hand close combat and take that guy out. And suddenly that ability no longer is there. So there's your answer. Instead of looking at the negative, which I know I've already seen it. I've already had discussions with people from my previous video from yesterday about, oh my God, this sucks, or this is unfortunate. I've heard a couple of people say positives, but instead of looking at the negative, look at the positive. Oh, this is a challenge to overcome. How can I do it? Try to figure it out. The same way as spell summoning is a challenge to overcome. Before you comp this kind of stuff, before you try to change the game, before you try to neuter it, play against it, play with it, see what you can figure out, because we're going to probably see more of this kind of stuff. This is not the end. This is just the beginning. Points or no points, we're going to see more mechanics like this. They're going to seem ridiculous. And hey, welcome to Age of Sigmar. If you're new to it, welcome to Age of Sigmar. If you've been playing, you should already know. Okay, and there you go. Have at it. Discuss, and have a great day, everybody.